The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy, as I mentioned, U.S. Conference of Mayors descending on Chicago. And BLM Brandon and CPD Superintendent Snelling confabbed with some of those mayors to talk about curfews, these teen takeovers that a couple most recent ones resulted in people getting shot. So now there's a call to institute a curfew to give police in Chicago the power to call curfews sort of on the fly as situations on the ground dictate.
Like Alderman Hopkins wants an 8 p.m. curfew instead of a 10 p.m. curfew. But don't forget Millennial Park, by the Bean. They have a curfew Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. 6 o'clock p.m. you have to be accompanied by an adult if you're 18 years and younger.
Yeah, and that has to be enforced. And we've seen this act before. For different reasons, I'm highly skeptical of the efficacy of curfews for different reasons than BLM Brandon is, of course. But here's what Police Superintendent Snelling had to say, ABC 7 reporting.
The Chicago Police Department and our police officers are dedicated to keeping everyone safe in this city. And if that means that this would be a tool that could help us get there, then I'll utilize that tool. But we would do it constitutionally.
Superintendent Snelling, speaking at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting in Chicago, said language is being worked out for how police would notify impacted communities, but the draft ordinance would also allow police to impose preventative curfews based on intelligence about planned gatherings.
We want to prevent young teens who are coming down to wreak havoc on the city to not form up.
BLM Brandon had this to say.
So this is about keeping people safe. I've brought people together to come up with a plan that ensures maximum safety, and we'll see what that product ultimately lends itself to be.
Mm-hmm. Maximum safety.
What does Rafael Mangual have to say? Rafael Mangual, senior fellow and head of research for the Manhattan Institute's Policing and Public Safety Initiative. Also the author of Criminal Injustice, What the Push for Mass Decarceration and Depolicing Gets Wrong and Who It Hurts Most. Rafael, thanks for joining us again.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
So what do you say about curfews, whether they're sort of formalized under certain strictures or they're the subject of some police discretion as proposed here?
Yeah, look, I think it's always better if you can formalize these things so that the police have a stronger leg to stand on when they inevitably get pushback from the community. But I think the most important thing here is that, you have to give police a reason to initiate interactions with people who they find suspicious, right? That's how more serious conduct is discovered. That's how more serious contraband is discovered. That's how more serious problems are averted. One of the things that Chicago is trying to deal with and struggle through is the fact that police don't really have the kind of backing from the city to take the kind of proactive posture that can stop the kind of gatherings that I think the city's worried about. When you see these sort of mass collections of teenagers starting to amass in places, that just don't seem quite right. If the police officers get out of their cars, when it goes from 5 to 15 individuals and, start to clear corners, they know deep down inside that the ACLU is going to get on their back, that the mayor is going to accuse them of, racially disparate policing, that the community members are going to push back to some degree. And, I think that ultimately makes them more reticent.
Well, to your point, the one hand, this is being proposed and being treated with open-mindedness, at least rhetorically, by the mayor. But on the other hand, the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability in Chicago, you can imagine the profile of the person on that commission, said police officers should be banned from making stops for certain traffic violations, such as missing only a front license plate, having a non-functioning headlight, or for playing loud music. Why would we have officers pulling people over for a light bulb, said the oversight chief. What say you?
The answer is actually very simple. What the oversight chief doesn't understand is that some of the most important arrests are made through traffic stops. I mean, I don't know the data in Chicago, but here in New York City, 40% of gun arrests begin as a traffic stop. Right, so those low-level infractions are actually really important for creating situations where police can begin interactions through which they're more likely to discover serious contraband. This whole idea that police should simply be focused on the more serious crimes and let the low-level stuff go is rooted in the misguided belief that criminals don't actually conceal their more serious crimes. Right? Once you understand that most criminals don't carry their guns, openly on holsters on their hip the way the police do, that, most drug dealers don't lay their products out on, tables with prices and out in public, you start to understand that, the police actually have to figure this stuff out. And the way that they do that is through interactions that often begin with very low-level conduct. I mean, I can tell you a really great story to kind of bring this point home. I did some ride-alongs in New York City with transit police last summer, and their whole mandate was to make serious felony arrests. We were in the Columbus Circle train station in Midtown Manhattan, very famous train station, where we saw 3 kids, one of whom was riding a bicycle inside the train station, which is a violation. Police officer goes, pulls the kid off the bike, gets his ID to write him a summons. The ID comes back with a warrant for armed robbery. So this kid was wanted by detectives. Once he was cuffed, his 2 friends came over. One of his friends, who was very upset about the arrest, had a knife visible in his pocket, which is another violation. Oh, he was then handcuffed, and he was discovered to have an open warrant for felony assault. So there were 2 felony arrests, including a weapons arrest, of 2 wanted individuals, and that entire interaction was based on a civil infraction. It's not even a criminal offense, but because the police officer decided to take an enforcement action, he was able to keep New Yorkers safer, and that's what policing critics don't understand.
I mean, look at the Oklahoma City bomber, Timothy McVeigh. He was pulled over because he was missing a license plate on his car.
That's exactly right. You never know what you're going to find. The nice thing is that criminals aren't always super careful when it comes to the details. Mm-hmm. They're not very detail-oriented, surprise, surprise, which is why it's actually important to give cops the confidence that they need to know that the city has their back when they go after people for the low-level stuff. Not because they want to throw the book at people for everybody, right? It's not zero-tolerance policing. Half the time, that police officers that I was with during that ride-along made a stop for, say, fare evasion. If it was a high school student with a clean record, they let the person go. They were exercising their discretion appropriately. But when a 35-year-old used a student Metro card to, enter the New York City transit system, and he, kind of bladed his body when police officers approached him, it was not a surprise to me that they later found a Ruger buried in his shoe. So this is the kind of thing, that police critics just really don't get or refuse to acknowledge because it doesn't fit their agenda.
Well, the other that is particularly salient in Chicago as well as New York, but even more so Chicago, because with no cash bail here, you have all sorts of people that are wandering the streets, even though they're facing felony charges, pending felony charges. So, I mean, with the decarceration that you've written about extensively, it makes it even more pressing for these quote-unquote low-level stops.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's not as if, you can be confident that all the serious offenders are behind bars in a city like Chicago. In fact, you can be confident about the opposite. And so you're extremely likely as a police officer, particularly if you're concentrating your patrol in a high-crime area, that there's going to be a decent share of the people who are committing even low-level infractions who are involved in more serious conduct, and that's exactly what we should want police to do. There was in 2016, after the whole Laquan McDonald thing, there was a drastic drop in police-initiated stops. It was like 85% in the first quarter after that news broke. Was it a surprise to anybody that homicides rose 58% that year? I mean, I wish I could get in the head of one of these progressive critics, because I just cannot believe that they just think that sort of thing is a coincidence when that relationship is proven out time and again in jurisdiction after jurisdiction and year after year, where if you have police pull back, particularly from the proactive enforcement of quality of life offenses, crime goes up. I mean, it's not a mystery.
Something else that you wrote about recently, where policymakers are handcuffing police rather than allowing them to handcuff criminals, is this push to eliminate gang databases at the departmental level.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in Chicago and Los Angeles and here in New York City, there's this idea that these gang databases are, just tools to facilitate racially disparate policing, right? In New York City, the big objection is that like 99% of the people who have been included in the gang database are black and Hispanic, right? And only 60% of the city's population here is black and Hispanic. This is taken to be prima facie evidence of racial profiling. But when you dig into the crime data, what you find in New York City is that about 97% of known shooters are black and Hispanic. About 95% of known shooting victims are black and Hispanic. And so, if you want police to be responsive to the most serious kinds of criminal problems, they're going to need intelligence to help fund their efforts. And so there's this kind of weird disconnect, because on the one hand, you have progressives saying, well, cops should be focused on the more serious crimes and let the low-level stuff go. And then when they take the steps necessary to inform themselves, to best position themselves to go after the more serious crimes, they say, well, oh, no, this is, creating racial disparities, so we don't like it either. They really can't have it both ways, but the reality is that the gang databases are really important crime-fighting tools, right? When there's a shooting, particularly a fatal shooting, and that shooting involves someone who's in a gang, police need to know that. One of the reasons they need to know that is because they can use gang databases to figure out who the rival gangs are and help predict where the retaliation might occur, and that can actually help them stop violence.
Rafael Mangual is a senior fellow and head of research for the Manhattan Institute's Policing and Public Safety Initiative. He's also the author of the book Criminal Injustice: What the Push for Mass Decarceration and Depolicing Gets Wrong and Who It Hurts Most. Rafael, thank you as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Wow. At the time of this being written, both gold and silver are up some 40%. That's 40% in just 1 year. In fact, this past year, gold has broken all-time historic records by hundreds of dollars an ounce. And unlike all other financial instruments used today, that historic record goes back thousands of years.